Alex had always known that family could be complicated, but nothing in his life had prepared him for Emily. She wasn't his daughter by blood, yet from the moment he stepped into her life, there was a quiet tension he couldn't ignore. Emily was 16, tall for her age, with sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. She had inherited her mother's stubborn streak and her father's defiance, a combination that made her simultaneously infuriating and fascinating. The first time Alex met her was awkwardly quiet. He had come to visit after marrying her mother, Sarah, who had insisted that Alex take a more active role in the household. Emily sat on the edge of the sofa, arms crossed, surveying him like a stranger who had somehow appeared in her life. He had extended his hand, and she had stared at it as though it were a foreign object. "Hi," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "I'm Alex." Emily didn't shake it. She only nodded once, coolly. "Emily," she said, her voice clipped. "You're my mom's new husband." "Yes," Alex said, attempting a smile. "I know it's a lot to adjust to, but I hope we can get along." Her expression didn't soften. Not a flicker. Not even the slightest acknowledgement that she considered the idea. That night, Alex found himself lying awake, listening to the quiet creaks of the house, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. Days turned into weeks. Emily maintained a polite distance, speaking only when spoken to and carefully monitoring her mother's moods. Alex tried to find common ground, movies, music, even cooking. Yet every attempt seemed to meet an invisible wall. He could sense her curiosity behind her guarded eyes, like she was evaluating him constantly. There were moments, small and fleeting, when she laughed at something he said, and Alex clung to those like lifelines. One evening, a rainstorm had trapped them in the living room. The electricity flickered, casting shadows across the room. Emily sat with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring out the window. Alex took a seat opposite her, noticing the way the light caught her hair, making it shine like copper. "You know," he began hesitantly, "when I was your age, storms used to scare me. I'd hide under my bed until it passed." Emily glanced at him, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "Really? You?" He chuckled softly. "Yeah, not exactly brave, I guess." She didn't say anything, but the tension between them seemed to soften, just a fraction. Alex realized that beneath her guarded exterior, Emily was trying to figure him out, just as much as he was trying to understand her. Over the following weeks, small moments began to appear, subtle and quiet. He found her leaving him a cup of tea when she knew he'd been up late working. She shared the occasional joke, almost under her breath, as if afraid to be caught. The atmosphere was delicate, like a tightrope stretched over a chasm of mistrust. Alex walked it carefully, aware of the boundaries, but hoping slowly to build something that could feel like family. Yet, there were times when he caught himself staring a little too long, when her laughter lingered in his mind far after it had faded. He chastised himself immediately, shaking off the thought, but the tension didn't fully go away. Emily seemed to sense it sometimes, her eyes narrowing just a touch, as if she understood more than he was willing to admit. The balance of their relationship was fragile, a mix of curiosity, restraint, and unspoken questions that neither dared to voice. One evening, as they sat together sorting through old photo albums, Emily paused on a picture of her mother as a teenager. "Mom was really different back then," she said softly, almost to herself. Alex nodded, careful not to say too much. "People change a lot," he said. "Sometimes we notice it more in others than in ourselves." She glanced at him, a fleeting smile appearing and disappearing before he could fully register it. In that moment, Alex felt a subtle shift, a tiny crack in the walls she had built around herself. It was enough to hope that, in time, the distance between them might shrink. As the night deepened, the rain outside slowing to a gentle drizzle. Alex realized that patience would be the key. He couldn't rush Emily, couldn't force the connection. All he could do was be present, steady, and attentive, hoping that she would someday allow him closer. And as he watched her leave the room, her figure framed by the dim light of the hallway, he understood that this was just the beginning, a complicated, tender, and unpredictable journey. Weeks passed, and the fragile rhythm between Alex and Emily began to take on a subtle, almost imperceptible pattern. He noticed her little habits, the way she tapped her pen against the table when she was thinking, how she lingered near the kitchen when he cooked, pretending to be absorbed in her phone. There was a careful observation in her eyes, as if she was measuring him, testing boundaries that he hadn't even realized existed. One late afternoon, Alex found himself working at the dining table, papers scattered around him. Emily appeared in the doorway, a sketchpad tucked under her arm. She had been taking art classes at school and was surprisingly talented. "I drew something," she said, a trace of hesitation in her voice. "Do you want to see?" Alex looked up, surprised but pleased. "Of course," he said. She handed him the sketch pad, and he carefully turned the pages. Most of the drawings were typical teenage explorations, but one of them caught him off guard. It was a portrait, not of anyone he knew exactly, but it seemed infused with a quiet intensity, eyes that felt almost alive, watching. He met hers across the table, and for a moment, words felt unnecessary. "That's really good," he said finally. "You've got a lot of talent." Emily shrugged, a faint blush rising to her cheeks. "Thanks," she muttered. "It's just something to pass the time." Yet it was more than that. Alex could feel the unspoken effort, the desire for acknowledgement, the cautious trust she was extending. And though he tried to focus on the compliment, a small, uncomfortable awareness tugged at him, the way her gaze lingered, how easily the silence between them carried an unspoken tension. He shook his head internally, forcing his thoughts back to the sketches. The next evening, Sarah mentioned a weekend family outing. Alex had hoped it would be a chance for Emily to open up more naturally, outside the confines of home. But when they arrived at the small lakeside park, Emily's guarded demeanor returned, sharp and alert. She sat a little apart, watching the water ripple under the low afternoon sun, while Alex and Sarah exchanged casual conversation. He noticed a subtle change, though. Emily occasionally glanced at him, her expression unreadable, before quickly looking away. He didn't press, he simply stayed within her line of sight, letting her choose when or if to engage. Later, when the others went for a walk, Emily remained seated on a bench. Alex approached cautiously. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, but he could hear the faint edge in her voice. "I'm fine." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat beside her, leaving a careful space between them. Silence stretched, neither pressing, both aware of the tension that hovered just under the surface. Then Emily spoke, almost whispering, "Do you ever feel like you're not supposed to be here?" Alex's chest tightened. He hadn't expected that. "Sometimes," he admitted softly. "But I try to focus on what I can do, rather than what I can't control." Her eyes flicked to his, searching for something, though he wasn't sure what. And in that moment, the air between them shifted. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was something, a fragile acknowledgement that they both felt the same uncertainty, the same careful negotiation of boundaries. On the drive home, Emily rested her head against the window, staring at the passing trees. Alex glanced at her occasionally, noticing the way her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of her seat. It was such a small gesture, yet it felt intimate in a way he wasn't entirely comfortable admitting to himself. He reminded himself again, patience. Observation. Nothing more. Back at home, late that night, he found her in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. Their eyes met briefly, and he offered a small smile. She returned it, almost imperceptibly, before quickly turning away. That tiny acknowledgement lingered in his mind long after she disappeared down the hall. Alex realized that the dynamics of their relationship were evolving not through force or insistence, but through countless small moments, charged with unspoken thoughts and careful observation. And yet, beneath the surface, a quiet tension remained, impossible to ignore. It was in the lingering looks, the hesitation in her movements, the way she seemed aware of his presence even when she pretended not to be. Alex understood that the journey ahead would not be straightforward. There would be missteps, moments of misunderstanding, and bursts of frustration. But there would also be connection, delicate and elusive, growing in quiet, almost imperceptible increments. As he lay awake that night, listening to the soft hum of the house, he reflected on Emily's growing complexity. She was more than a teenager testing her boundaries. She was a young woman negotiating the world, and he was a newcomer in her life, trying to find his place. And in the middle of that uncertainty, a strange, unspoken awareness persisted that the most meaningful connections often emerged not from grand gestures, but from the smallest, most fragile interactions. Alex knew deep down that the next steps would require even greater care. The balance was delicate, the tension persistent, but there was potential. And sometimes, potential alone was enough to keep him awake at night, imagining the subtle ways their relationship might grow or falter in the days to come. The weeks following the lakeside outing brought subtle changes. Emily's walls weren't crumbling, but the edges were softening. She no longer ignored Alex entirely. Instead, she offered fleeting glances, small gestures of acknowledgement, like the way she refilled his coffee without being asked or left her headphones on the table when he entered the room. It was a delicate dance of proximity and distance, one neither of them fully understood yet instinctively respected. One evening, Alex was reading in the living room when Emily appeared silently, a book in hand. She sat on the floor near the sofa, her legs crossed, flipping the pages slowly. He glanced over, noticing the tension in her shoulders, the faint bite of her lower lip, a sign of concentration, or perhaps of something else he couldn't quite name. "You're reading a lot these days," he remarked casually, hoping to prompt conversation without seeming intrusive. Emily looked up briefly, eyes sharp but guarded. "It's nothing special. Just something to pass the time." Alex nodded, not pushing further. He had learned that pressing too hard only caused her to retreat. Instead, he leaned back and let the silence stretch comfortably. After a while, she spoke again, softer this time. "Do you ever feel like you don't fit in? Like you're just on the outside, watching everyone else?" The question caught him off guard, more intimate than he expected. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes. But I try to focus on what's around me rather than worrying about what I can't control." Emily didn't respond immediately, just returned her attention to the book. Yet Alex noticed a subtle shift. Her shoulders relaxed, a tiny signal that his words had reached her, if only slightly. The tension between them had an unusual quality. It wasn't overt, but it hummed beneath the surface, present in the spaces between words, in lingering glances, in the way Emily sometimes hesitated just a fraction too long before moving past him in the hallway. Alex found himself analyzing her behaviors, trying to decode the invisible language they were developing. Every small gesture became a clue, the way she absent-mindedly twirled a strand of hair when she thought no one was watching, or how her gaze flickered toward him before quickly darting away. One rainy Saturday, Alex decided to tackle a small home project in the garage. Emily appeared out of nowhere, holding a tray with 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She placed one carefully beside him, the steam curling in the dim light. "Thanks," he said, genuinely touched. She shrugged lightly, avoiding his eyes. "I figured you'd want one." He could feel the unspoken tension lingering, the charged energy in her presence that made the ordinary act of sharing a drink feel almost intimate. And yet, he reminded himself again: boundaries, patience, observation, nothing more. Later, when they were cleaning up the garage together, their movements overlapped at times, hands brushing as they reached for the same tool. Each contact was fleeting, but it left a trace, a silent acknowledgement of each other's presence. Emily didn't speak, but he noticed her glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking, eyes questioning, testing. As the day faded into evening, they ended up sitting on the porch steps, listening to the rain. The quiet was comfortable, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Emily leaned slightly against him, more for warmth than affection, and he resisted the urge to comment, letting the moment exist without interference. It was in these small, almost imperceptible moments that their connection deepened, not through words, but through shared space, mutual observation, and the tension of unvoiced emotions. Alex realized that trust, in this strange, evolving relationship, wasn't a grand declaration. It was built in the quiet, in the fleeting glances, in the moments when neither of them pulled away entirely. That night, as he lay awake, Alex reflected on the subtle dynamics between them. The tension was no longer a barrier, it was a thread, fragile but present, linking them in a way neither had fully acknowledged. He understood that the path forward would be neither simple nor linear. There would be moments of closeness, followed by abrupt retreats, a delicate oscillation that demanded careful attention. And yet, amidst the complexity, a quiet fascination persisted. He found himself observing her not with judgment, but with curiosity, appreciating the intricate ways she navigated her world. Emily, in turn, was beginning to notice him, not as an authority figure, not as a stranger, but as someone whose presence was increasingly difficult to ignore. The night stretched on, and Alex realized that the tension, subtle and persistent, was both a challenge and a promise. It suggested the possibility of connection, however fragile, that might grow over time if handled with care. In that quiet, reflective hour, he understood that their relationship was evolving, nuanced and unpredictable, marked by the tiniest gestures that carried the heaviest weight of meaning. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that this fragile, electric tension between them, so easily overlooked by the unobservant eye, was only the beginning of a story that neither of them fully understood, but both were beginning to feel. In the spaces between words and glances, in the silence that carried more weight than conversation ever could. Autumn had begun to settle over the small town, painting the trees in shades of amber and gold. The changing season mirrored the slow transformation in their household. Emily's cautious distance had softened into a tentative rhythm, a quiet dance of observation and shared moments. Alex could feel it in the way she moved around the house, less guarded, more willing to occupy the same space, though the boundaries remained delicate. One evening, Sarah had gone out to meet a friend, leaving Alex and Emily alone. The house was warm, the low hum of the heater blending with the distant sound of the wind rattling the windows. Emily was at the kitchen counter, carefully preparing a snack. Alex leaned against the doorway, watching her movements. "You've gotten really good at this," he said softly. "Not that I doubted it." She glanced up, a small smile tugging at her lips, then looked back at her task. "Thanks," she said, almost shyly. "I guess I've had practice." They moved in companionable silence for a while, the kind that had grown between them over weeks of small, shared experiences. Alex realized that this quiet was no longer tense. It carried a sense of familiarity, a fragile trust that had taken root. As the evening wore on, Emily brought the snack to the living room and set it on the coffee table. She sat opposite him, knees drawn to her chest, glancing up occasionally but mostly absorbed in her own thoughts. Alex picked up a piece of fruit, offering her one in return. Their fingers brushed briefly. She didn't pull away, only shifted slightly, a small acknowledgement of the contact. They began talking, hesitantly at first, about trivial things, school projects, books, a movie Sarah had mentioned, but gradually, the conversation deepened. Emily's voice carried a softness Alex had rarely heard. He noticed her opening up, not just through words, but through subtle gestures, leaning slightly closer, laughing at his jokes, letting her gaze linger just a fraction longer than before. "Alex," she said finally, her tone careful, "do you ever feel like some things are hard to explain? Like there are parts of yourself that nobody really sees?" He looked at her, seeing vulnerability he hadn't before. "All the time," he admitted. "I think it's normal. Some things are just private, even from the people closest to us." Her eyes met his, and in that glance, there was a shared understanding, a recognition of the unspoken. The distance that had once seemed insurmountable had softened into something manageable, a quiet connection, fragile but undeniable. Later, as they tidied the living room together, Emily paused, glancing at Alex. "Thanks for sticking around," she said, almost a whisper. "Even when I'm difficult." Alex smiled, a warmth spreading through him. "It's not a problem. Everyone deserves someone who notices them, even the difficult parts." She nodded, a small, genuine smile forming, fleeting, but significant. The tension that had hovered between them for so long was still there, a subtle undercurrent, but it was no longer a barrier. It had transformed into a silent bond, an acknowledgement of presence, of attention, of care. As the night deepened, Emily went to her room, leaving Alex alone in the quiet house. He reflected on the journey they had taken, from awkward introductions, guarded glances, and tentative gestures to moments of connection, unspoken understanding, and subtle intimacy. There had been tension, yes, but also growth, patience, and mutual respect. He realized that relationships, even the most unconventional ones, were not built overnight. They were forged slowly, in the spaces between words, in gestures that seemed insignificant but carried weight, in the delicate balance of attention and restraint. Alex smiled quietly to himself. Emily was still her own person, independent, strong-willed, and often mysterious, but the invisible walls she had built were no longer impermeable. There was trust now, fragile but growing, and an understanding that sometimes the most meaningful connections are those nurtured in silence, in observation, and in shared moments that speak louder than words. And as he finally climbed into bed, listening to the soft rhythm of the house settling for the night, he knew that whatever the future held, this delicate, intricate bond between them had become something worth cherishing, an unspoken promise that patience, respect, and attentiveness could transform tension into connection and distance into quiet intimacy. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Alex felt a sense of calm. They had found their rhythm, subtle and fragile, and in that, there was hope.